We're here on the new banks of Griffin Creek. Griffin Creek is one of the larger tributaries to the Snoqualmie River and an important salmon spawning creek. In 2019, 2020, a lot of high flow events brought down a lot of sediment and gravel from upstream and sent the Griffin Creek kind of in two directions and made it jump out of its channel.
We had about 15 acres of agricultural property that we couldn't use. It would just flood out. When the rains would come, the rains would push the water across the fields.
They're high and dry. The creek is, that's the creek over there.
And the salmon, in order to spawn upstream, would literally have to swim across the grass to get to the creek.
It's so wedged into the grass.
The single thread creek was no longer there to guide the fish upstream.
Dead. Dead.
A lot of the coho salmon that frequent this creek were getting stranded in the fields and having a harder time finding their way upstream.
We had spillage over the banks, above and below both of the barn structures, and flooding in the barns, in the house. Well, in 2020, we probably had about 8 acres already planted of corn and beans and had planned to have about 30 to 40 acres planted that year. But realized now with the new norm, if you will, that we couldn't plant it at all. We were not able to do the spring plow. We knew that a rainstorm in the fall would knock out crops. So instead of having our 6-month sort of growing window, which we're used to in the Pacific Northwest, it got down to around a 60-day guarantee, and that would not work for a vegetable operation.
The fish farm flood effort is a King County-led initiative where we bring the various stakeholders that work on the landscape in the Snoqualmie Valley together. And that includes the salmon recovery, fish, the agricultural sector, farm, and then some of the flood control advocates in the valley, so flood. And it allows us to look at the landscape collaboratively, and this is important because salmon farms and flood control all use exactly the same river corridors. And it's generated a lot of good cross conversation, and in this case it was actually the driver behind this project.
What we did with this project was try to improve salmon habitat, reduce the flood risks on these nearby farms, and come up with a solution that was win-win.
We've got a much easier spawning ground and pathway for the fish, and we still are able to recapture agricultural land that was here before the flooding happened.
Now we can adequately plan for, do our production, look at the rotations that are going to be acceptable to us, and even though some of that ground is still lowland and may get flooding from the Snoqualmie, we are able to put it into its best and highest use, which I think is to grow food for our local community.